All right, we are live and welcome everyone to another panel by Fathering Together. My name is Brian Anderson, co-founder and executive director. And tonight I'm very excited to do our first of three panels that we're calling Dads Listen Up, where we talk to women leaders in different fields to talk about the impacts that the relationships they have with their fathers and father figures have in their careers, in their personal life, and in their goals. And I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of one of our board members, our vice president, actually, Emily Rachel Williams. She is a senior woman leader, rather, at a global organization and does a lot of great work for raising awareness and building racial equality across multiple sectors. So with that, I will hide and leave you all in the capable hands of Emily and our guests. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you, Brian. Good evening. My name is Emily Williams. I am the Vice President of Fathering Together's Board of Directors. I have a background in gender equality and racial justice. I increase organizations' capacity to leverage their missions for social justice through global programs and leadership development. I'm a daughter who was raised primarily by a dad, so Fathering Together's mission is very important to me. I'm very excited to be here tonight with our accomplished panelists. This is the first panel in a series of 3 discussions. Tonight, we're focused on how dads can influence daughters' professional success. So before we get started, I will briefly introduce our panelists. We have Verda Colvin. She is an appellate court judge for the state of Georgia. Hi, Verda.
Hi, thank you, Emily.
We have Linda Brennan. She is a certified business coach. Hi, Linda, how are you?
Good evening, Emily. Hi, everybody.
And we have Christy Kovac. She is president and CEO of Sheridan Construction.
Good evening.
And we have Amy Maley, a wealth management advisor and vice president at Merrill Lynch Wealth Management.
Hello, everybody.
Great. So you all are high-powered, professionally successful women. We know that so many dads want that for their daughters. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you all about how your dads have shaped your professional success. So one of the things that I think is really special about Fathering Together's mission is that it brings together dads and father figures from all walks of life to bond over being fathers, and in a community where growth and learning are promoted. So the first question is, how would you describe your father and what kind of dad was he? And we know that, so many, that not only biological dads can play the role of father or can have a fathering influence on the lives of daughters. So we include father figures in that definition. Christy, would it be okay if we started with you?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Great, thank you.
So I'm going to talk about my grandfather, my mother's dad. My dad was in my life and still is, and he was just a hardworking man and did the best he could to raise us. We're closer now than we were when I was growing up. He tells me he's proud of me, and that my mother would be too if she were still here with us. So that's a nice, encouraging word. But my grandfather was really my hero and influence, and I think where I am today. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and grandfather, and he was a caring person, but firm, had high expectations. If I didn't want to go to school, I had to go report to him and tell him why I wasn't going to school, and it had to be a good reason. So that was just kind of the man he was.
Great, and I know that I can relate to, having a father who had very high expectations,
Yes.
Right? Yeah, so thank you for that, Christy. Thank you. Linda, how about we go to you next?
Sure. My dad, it might be sufficient to say he was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. So that might give you some insight into his parenting style. He grew up in a very, very difficult family. and really didn't have any kind of role model by which to parent. So I think he meant well, but he was pretty verbally abusive beyond the point of having high expectations. And, that was hurtful growing up, but it helped me to achieve what I have achieved. So it's kind of a mixed blessing. But I know he loved me.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And thank you for being vulnerable in that way. Appreciate that. Great. Okay, and then Verda, how about we go to you next?
My dad was the life of the party, talkative, vivacious, never met a stranger, was a friend to everyone, and very philosophical and spiritual. And as a result, he and I would have these deep conversations that most kids at 8 or 9 are not having, but that's who he is. But in addition to being that way, he was very meticulous about wanting what he wanted me to do. And that made me nervous. It was only later in my life that I understood why he was so, he was a man of mixed bags. And I found out when I was an adult that he suffered with bipolar. But he never voiced it, never told anyone. And I didn't find out until I was 24, 25 after graduating from law school. And so I guess that's why he had a whole range of personality traits. But many of those traits he passed off to me, not the diagnosis, but just this personality that's big and engaging. And so that's helped me become who I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that, Verda. Thank you. And then Amy, how about we go to you?
Some similarities. Had very high expectations for all 4 of us children. Very much a type A, the family leader, very traditional role in the family. Each of us children experienced my father in different ways, and I only really learned that as an adult because I felt both his love and his discipline and his rules. And my younger sister, I learned, only felt the rules and the constant requirements, to do chores and things. And she never felt quite the closeness to my father that I felt. He also, as Verda's father, was the life of the party, big personality, but at the same time, very goal-oriented person.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm definitely hearing some overlap here. High expectations, perhaps some, along with those high expectations, maybe an expectation of, a very disciplined approach to parenting, and also, and maybe in the way that you were raised. I also want to note, Linda, that you had said that, perhaps your father didn't have a role model for fathering. And I think that that's something that a lot of dads struggle with, right? Like, where is, if they themselves didn't have a great father, then where are they getting the model from, right, for their fathering? And Verda, hearing about your father and mental illness, I mean, I think, definitely as a culture, we don't necessarily deal with mental illness very well, right? And we don't talk about it a lot. And so, I can imagine not only that would have been challenging as a father to, talk to, his family about, but also, being a child and not necessarily understanding, all of the fluctuations in behavior, right? Or all of the changes. And so, I think this also speaks to the complexity of being a parent, right? And then also being a child, right? So I appreciate you all sharing a little bit of information about your dad with us, and what kind of father, and then also grandfather he was. So thank you for that. Much research shows that fathers who are emotionally invested, active in the lives of their daughters, and not only fathers, but biological dads, but also father figures, have an immense impact, right? and furthermore, that daughters who have strong relationships with their dads or their father figures as children, not only do they get better grades in school, are they more emotionally resilient, they also make more money, among other things. So I would like it if you all would tell us just a little bit more about your career paths, and then also how your father has influenced who you are today.
Okay. You want me to go?
Yeah, that would be great, Linda.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I am actually on my third career, and I owe a lot of it to my dad's brand of encouragement. I started in the corporate world, working in engineering and management positions for 4 different Fortune 100 companies. And even though he and my mom had very traditional roles, he encouraged me to be a feminist and to stand up for myself. And so I went back to school after my MBA to get a PhD in industrial engineering, because I was having a hard time getting past that glass ceiling in the corporate world, and ended up being a college professor for 24 years. Once I had raised my family, I decided to hang up my shingle, and now I'm in business for myself as an executive coach and trainer. And I remember very distinctly, I was in 9th grade. Sorry, my cat decided to be in the Zoom. I was in 9th grade, and I had done poorly on a math test, and the teacher wanted me to drop out of honors math. And my dad gave me the proverbial kick in the butt, and he said, you are going to make this work. You're not going into a lower math class. And it turns out industrial engineering is basically applied math. And if my dad hadn't pushed me like that, I don't know what my career trajectory would have been. So it's funny how those little moments can have such a profound impact on your life.
Thank you for that. And I love how you said that your father encouraged you to be a feminist, right? I think that's so
Don't be a nurse, be a doctor, whatever. It was funny because, my mom had a very traditional role, but he saw something different for me.
Yeah. And that's great, right? And that's another piece of research too that shows that what's most influential is the relationship between the father and the daughter. And so we see that in the story that you're sharing. And then also too, it was like you said, your father encouraged you to be a feminist, and then shortly thereafter you said that you were hitting a glass ceiling in the corporate world, and then you made a different career decision, right? And so I think that influence is important for daughters to also understand, the kinds of external pressures around being a woman, right? That they can identify those things as opposed to internalizing them, right? Like you were able to say, this was a glass ceiling, right? Not that there was something wrong with you because you weren't promoting, right? So that's another really important role. And it sounds like your dad played, and also, I know that I can relate to that as well. My father would always say to me, Emily, be independent. Make sure that you take care of yourself, right? Like always be able to pay your own way, always be able to, be strong in your career, all of these things. And I know that for me has been very important as I have encountered both sexism and racism, to just know that that's not something that's, wrong about me, but that's something about the external world, which I can navigate, right? So that's important. And thank you for that, Linda. And welcome to your cat who has joined us.
Eclipse.
Hello, Eclipse. Okay, so let's see. Verda, would you like to go next to tell us a bit about your career path and how your father has influenced who you are today?
As you were talking after I spoke last time, I had to stop the tears. My dad and I had this incredible relationship, even though now I can understand it in hindsight, the struggle with the mental health illness. My dad had this philosophy that I was an Andrews, that's my maiden name, and Andrews don't fail. And we can do anything we put our mind to. And it was great in that it empowered me because he told me I was special because I was an Andrews, but it also did something to my psyche about whether I was good enough, separate and apart from being an Andrews. And so, I constantly grew up with those kind of struggles. And maybe some of that was because of the mental health illness. He didn't realize that I needed to know that I was special in and of myself. But because he gave me that strong constitution of my self-worth, I just never doubted myself when I was doing something. If I decided to do it, between he and my mom, they had this mantra: if you decide to do something, you can do it because it's nobody better than you, and you can do whatever you set your mind to. And so he would just, that was just his philosophy. That was the way you looked at life, and that's how you did life. And so if I did well, of course you were going to do well. You're an Andrews. We're good folks. We do everything well. And so he just gave me this sense of empowerment. So I never felt like I had to make excuses for being a woman or African American. And so when people would ask me questions like that, I was just kind of perplexed because those aspects of my being didn't define who I could be or what I could be. And so he empowered me to that extent. And I owe a lot of what I've done. And I will give both he and my mom half credit to, even in the madness, him empowering me like that.
Fabulous. That's so great to hear. And also, you can see how, he kind of instilled, it's like also the high expectations there of, nope, if you do something, you do it well, right? If you decide to do it, it will be done, right? And normalizing that, that expectation and high performance for you. And Verda, will you tell us just a little bit more about your career path and how you came to be an appellate court judge?
Well, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 6 because I wanted to save the world. So my two biggest heroes at that time were, and I feel bad that I don't say my parents, but it is what it is, Martin Luther King Jr. and Jesus Christ. Because I went to a private religious school when I was young, and I thought, how cool is it that you care so much about others that you don't matter, like you put yourself second. And I just thought that is the ultimate, being to care about people that much. And so I wanted to try to do my own part to kind of save the world or to do something that mattered in my mind, because I had always cared about justice and being fair. And so I went to law school, got out of law school, worked for a firm that I thought would be, was utopia, but found out it's about the money. And so then I started a path of doing what I do well, which is trial work. And I started off in prosecution. Didn't think I'd ever work for the man. But I came to find out that as a result of being in that role, I determined who was prosecuted. I determined what sentence they received, or at least the recommendation. And so I found that empowering. And so I just kept on that journey, went to a solicitor's office, a DA's office, then the federal U.S. Attorney's office. And so from there, my boss came to me and told me he thought Macon, Georgia was ready for an African-American female judge. It was 2014, we had never had an African-American female judge on the bench for Superior Court. And so he thought I was a good candidate, and so I applied, and the governor at that time appointed me. And I served there for 6 years, and then it was a Republican governor who appointed me initially for the Superior Court, and then our next Republican governor appointed me for the appellate bench. So it was the first time a Republican governor had ever appointed an African-American female to the bench. And so that's where I am. And my whole mantra has been about, seeing people and not just processing people, and being my best to follow the law, but also be instructive about who or what we should be as a judicial body, and, making determinations that affect people's lives, whether that's civilly or criminally.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story, Verda. And, how brave to be the first. Right? That's not always easy. And I really like that mantra of yours, see people first, right? Don't only process them. I think that's really powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Amy, let's go to you.
Okay,
So,
so I think some of the ways my dad influenced me were overt, and some of them were just by example. So, as he set an example by working hard, and he worked hard at his office. He was a dentist, and he worked hard at home. He always kept a meticulous yard. And then when we moved to the farm, we had a half-acre vegetable garden, and we were expected to work on that with him. And so he set a really good example for me that way. And so that's kind of a big picture item. But then some of the detail things that he taught me, like he was big into posture, having good posture. And he just thought that that gave you such a sense of confidence and made you look confident even when some days you just don't feel confident. And so it was big things and it was little things. But he also told me, and Verda, I think we lived in parallel universes because he was very big. Our last name was Heil, and he was very big on, Heils are successful. And so that was a mantra. And now I'm sitting here thinking, ooh, I need to tell my boys that. Um, anyways, he taught me things explicitly that he wanted me to know. And like, so I worked for him for 3 summers in the dentist office chairside, and he taught me then your job is to be one step ahead of the dentist and anticipate what implement he needs next, what formula he needs next. And I took that with me beyond his office, which is always be one step ahead of your boss, or sometimes that's always be one step ahead of your client. I think nowadays we'd say be proactive, maybe. And so he taught me that, and he was always a planner. He was always sitting in his chair in the living room, planning up big schemes for his life. He always knew what he was going to do next. He bought a farm. He bought a second farm. We never saw this coming. We moved from the upper class suburbs to the farm. Ah, but he was always a planner. And now I find that for my family, I'm the planner. I'm the one. I've saved for retirement since I was 22. I guess I didn't just fall into financial advisory work. And he always taught me about, planning and saving. And in fact, I started off in accounting because my dad would bring his client payments, the checks home, and have me write out the deposit. And he just said, you know, when it was time to go to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really wasn't ready to go to college. I just wanted to hang out with my high school boyfriend. And he said, study accounting. You'll be good at it. You'll always have a job. And he was right. So those are my big takeaways about high expectations and his example, leading by example.
and maybe your father was one step ahead of you in assigning you that task to, write down all the checks. And then here it is, you're at college, and what am I going to study? And your dad already has something ready for you, right? A suggestion.
I don't doubt it, Emily.
Right. Yeah, that's great, Amy. And can you just share just a little bit more about your career path with us?
Okay, so I did graduate with a degree in accounting. I worked in a retail setting for a division of Macy's as an auditor. Um, I worked for 17 years in the newspaper industry in 3 different locations for a national chain of newspapers. And when we began to run scenarios projecting, well, what if 50% of our advertising went to the internet? This light bulb went off, and I said, I need to find something else to do. And I'll mention a book. Linda's the book lady, but I'll mention a book called What Color is Your Parachute? Because I didn't think I wanted to stay in accounting. I see you nodding, but I really wanted to make a thoughtful choice for what to do next. And I actually stuck with it and had the discipline to go all the way through the book and all the checklists. And it said you'll either be a financial advisor or you'll be a real estate agent. And so here I am, a financial advisor. I started with a small firm for 4 years, and I've been with Merrill Lynch for 15 now. And so about 20 years in the business.
Wow.
Very
Can't hear you.
impressive. Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, Amy, thank you for sharing that. That's a really impressive career path. And, I can relate. I'm so happy that you mentioned What Color is Your Parachute, because that's a book that I swear by. And I started off working in higher ed. And so when I was working with students who are at that point of, looking for jobs and trying to figure out what they're going to do next, that's a book that I always recommend. So yes. Okay, and Christy, so can we hear from you?
Yes, yes. Emily, like your dad told you, my granddad told me the exact same thing. I want you to be independent. Don't grow up and be able to take care of yourself and not depend on someone else to do it. So that's my mantra. Um, and my career path was, again, spawned by my grandfather. I remember being in his living room one day when I was in high school, and he said, "You need to be an engineer. They make good money." And I said, "What is an engineer? Don't they drive trains?" That's the only kind of engineer I knew. So I researched and found out exactly what he was talking about. I only applied to one college, which was the technical college here in Georgia Tech. I didn't know that you were supposed to, we didn't have a college of family, a family of college graduates. So I really didn't have much help. I didn't realize you were supposed to apply to several colleges to have options. So I was very lucky and, and was accepted, because I don't know what plan B would have been. But I actually, instead of going into engineering, went to engineering school, but thought I wanted to be an architect. So I could design my own house. So I started in architecture and realized real quickly that was too practical. Didn't have the design side that you need to have for that trade. So the school of building construction was, or building construction major was in the School of Architecture. And someone said, "You need to check this out." And I did, and fell in love with it. Again, mostly male dominated industry there. I think there were 3 females in classes back then, but graduated with a construction management degree and left Georgia to go work for a large international company in Texas for 2 years, and then came back home. And I started my career in estimating, so numbers, like Amy and probably like Linda love. So estimating project construction costs, and grew from that to head a pre-construction or estimating department, and then moved into the executive vice president, and then currently president. Been doing that for about 4 years now.
Wow, great. Thanks for sharing that, Amy. And how brave to, go into a field that's male dominated, right? And, that's commendable. And, I can see how, in your story, how your grandfather's, encouraging you to be independent also led to you taking initiative, right? Researching what is engineering, applying to school, and then, making your career shifts. And even, I think sometimes it's underestimated what it means to move away from home, right? And so even, moving from, where you were born in Georgia to Texas, for a few years even, that takes bravery too, right? And also probably a lot of self-reflection, because we learn and grow when we live in new places.
Yes. And I'll add real quickly, I never wanted to disappoint my grandfather. So even after moving to Texas, I've, got a degree, I've got a career. I wanted to come back home, but I needed a reason. I couldn't just say, "I don't want to do this anymore. I want to come back home." So I said, "I want to get my master's, and I'll do it at Mercer."
Right, exactly. Like just that parallel to school, right? Like you couldn't just not go to school. You had to go to your grandfather with a really good reason why you didn't want to go to school, right? I can see how that's very similar to, okay, I want to come home,
Right.
not because I want to, but because I have this whole plan in place.
That's right. Yes.
Right. Wow. 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 So thank you for sharing those stories. And, it's really clear how, even if not totally perfect, your fathers and your grandfather have really shaped, who you all are today, and then also the professional success that you've had. And at the same time, we know that no parent is perfect, and dads may not always have the support they need. So is there anything your father didn't do that you wish he had? What do you wish your father had said to you? So if it's okay, Amy, could we start with you?
Yeah, the thing that I could think of, and I really didn't, somebody else observed this about me and said it to me, and I sort of had an aha moment. But my father was so sure of himself and so able to give people advice and tell them what he thought they should do. For example, go into accounting, that I think that I skipped that whole stage of learning how to make decisions for myself. And so I let other people make decisions for me. And as an adult, I think I ruminate more on decisions. And it's not that I'm wishy-washy, but I can see both sides of everything. And so it will take me a long time to make a decision. And that really was the only thing that I could think of that maybe he didn't equip me to do, or neither of my parents, really taught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. Is there anything that you wish your father had told you that he didn't?
Nothing came to mind as I was thinking about that, but I suspect that as y'all have your input, I'll be sitting here nodding my head. No, he gave a lot of advice about, being successful and working hard, but I can't think of anything that he's been gone since 1988. So I've now been alive longer without him than I was with him. So I really, looking back, can't think of anything that I wish he had told me, given me, done for me necessarily. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and wonderful. Thanks. Okay, so Verda, could we go to you next?
Okay. I wish my father would have shared with me his mental health diagnosis. Some of the insecurities that I've had about feeling attractive as a female was a result of him not being able to. He told me how strong I was, but he never did the father girl thing, and I'd like for fathers to remember that. So he never told me I was pretty. I think the first time he said something about I might be attractive was when I was in law school, my third year, doing a mock trial. He came to UGA to see me, and he said, "You know what? You're kind of attractive." So he didn't give me that affirmation that girls to get from their fathers, and I needed that. And so sometimes, as close as we were, sometimes our relationship was kind of, particularly as I got older, like in law school, it was kind of tense because I was realizing what I didn't get. And although he was there for me in some ways, I was struggling with that. And so had he shared the diagnosis, I could have understood going through it, why those things happened, what I was feeling. And now having to kind of go back through my life in retrospect to kind of understand what was happening, it's okay. But I think how much deeper our relationship could have been as adults had he done that. Because with mental health illness, as it lingers on, it becomes more pervasive, particularly when you don't own it. And my dad never really owned his diagnosis, so he was constantly going in and out of mania, which I didn't know until afterwards and pieced it together with the doctors. And so when I was 14, it's kind of like he fell off the map. I went to see him once when he moved to Charlotte. And after that, it just became distant. And that's a part of your life when you really need your dad. My parents divorced when I was 6. He was Johnny on the spot every other weekend, picked me up religiously. We went camping, but I understand that was because he was trying to deal with the mental health without the medication. So the thought was, well, let me go to relaxed settings and then it'll be okay. And so sometimes and I'm so different with my kids, sometimes adults think that children should be kept away from some issues, but what they don't understand is when the issue is so pervasive, is it is affecting the child. And so it's taken a lot of my adult years to just get past that. Because I used to say, well, it doesn't matter if I'm not pretty. I can be smart enough. I can work hard enough. But that's never enough to get past that stuff that you miss. And so that's what I wish I could tell my dad. I wish he would have shared that with me. And my dad's mental health was the cause of his death. So he died right before, when I was going through the process of being appointed to the Superior Court. That's when he was dying. I was actually on the phone with people from the governor's office as I was cleaning out his house, because he died inside his house because he never really fully owned his mental health diagnosis. And for me, that is why even now, he died in 2013, I could cry, tears came to my eyes, because so much we miss because he didn't share. And kids are resilient. They can take some things, and it helps their world. So dads, please be willing to share with your daughters. Don't let them go through years of thinking maybe they weren't quite good enough because they didn't know something that would have explained everything.
Amen.
Yeah,
Amen.
thanks for sharing that, Verda. And to your point, kids are resilient, and the more information they have about their environments and the people around them, the better able they are to cope, right? And kids can be very savvy in that way, and also very accepting and very compassionate, right? And that's a beautiful thing. And I can also totally relate with you, Verda. I think it was, in my family, it was kind of this notion that, like, my father always instilled in us, make sure that you're humble, right? Humility is very important. We were all, pretty exceptional athletes, for example, and it was never acceptable for us to brag ever, right? And part of that also was that he didn't necessarily tell us how great we were, right? And so we didn't know that. And one of the things that actually, I've just been home for the last several weeks, and my sister and I were together with my grandmother, and my father had said to me, he said, you and your sister just looked so beautiful sitting there this afternoon. And it just meant so much to me because, I don't know that my father ever said that so plainly and straightforwardly until this time in my adult life. And so I can really relate to what it feels like to not hear that, and then to have to kind of do that guesswork as a girl, as a young woman, as an adult woman, right? Until we do our own healing and then internalize and know, oh yeah, absolutely, we are beautiful, right? But it makes such a difference for girls and daughters to hear that from their dads. And when I really think about it, I think that probably, like, for whatever reason, that was not easy for my dad to say, right? And I'm sure that I would imagine a lot of dads can relate to that. And so, I would add that to the advice of, like, definitely tell your daughters that they're beautiful inside and out. That's really important. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, smart,
Mm-hmm.
able.
Mm-hmm.
They need those words of affirmation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Okay, thank you. And Christy, could we go to you next?
Sure. I think what I missed is having someone not say, don't be so tough on yourself. Give yourself a break. Linda says a lot. Give yourself compassion. So that's probably the biggest thing that I look back and reflect and wish I would have done more of.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing that more now, but I could have used more of that earlier.
Right. Yeah. And that's a really good point, Linda. I'm sorry, Christy, that's a really good point. And because, the other thing is that, yes, we need the positive affirmation. You're smart, you're beautiful, right? You're super capable. Also, you can be a little hard on yourself, right? It's okay to ease up, or maybe you're being a little bit judgmental. Like, having those truths are also really important to hear as well, right? Because, so much of important and healthy relationships is that they can be a mirror for us, right? So we can see ourselves in how another person relates to us, and especially our dads, right? So hearing both sides is important.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that, Christy. Okay, Linda, would you like to share with us?
I would. I am going to offer a slightly different perspective and say I wish my dad had told me about the importance of building friendly relationships with the people that you're in school with and you work with. Um, it's only just at this point in my career that I'm really understanding the power of networking. And I don't mean, going to a cocktail party and glad handing people, but the idea of um, establishing cordial relationships with people, even if you're not best friends with them, and just staying in touch and being genuinely interested in what's going on in other people's lives. And that give and take that makes life worthwhile, and that makes you successful in business. But all businesses is personal, right? It's all relational, and my dad didn't work that way, and he didn't encourage that. He was always very suspicious of other people, and I think as a result, I kept people at arm's length for a really long time, except for some close friends. But, could have accomplished that much more. Maybe I would have gotten past that glass ceiling if I had done a better job of building my professional network. So it's not about being the most popular person. I wouldn't tell dads to encourage their daughters to be popular necessarily, but to invest in relationships, um, and be curious about other people. I think would have been really helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I can relate to also, and perhaps slightly differently, but just being so competitive, right? And having such an influence on being successful and making it and accomplishing, my goals that I often, or there have been times where I've definitely prioritized that over relationships. But the relationships are really important. And we do get so much of that from our parents, right? When you talk about like your father being suspicious of other people, right? Even if that's not explicitly stated, kids pick that up, right? Just by observing their parents. Daughters pick that up by observing their dads. And
Oh,
so,
and for me, it was even explicit. He would say, "Don't do business with friends."
mhm,
You know,
mhm,
I've had some great success doing business with friends.
right.
And so it's understanding that relational aspect is really important.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think um, we have a question from the audience, our virtual audience. So the question is, what skill or trait would be helpful today? Um, and I think perhaps maybe if we could get more information about that question, what skill or okay, actually, I think I understand. So what skill or trait would be helpful for dads to give their daughters today, or to encourage them today in today's sort of professional world and environment, right? Because things have really changed rapidly, not only in the last 6 months, right? Since we've been living in a pandemic, but also just within the last 5 to 10 years, as we've seen, um, more of an emphasis on tech and tech growing as an industry. Um, And also, I think social justice has become more of a career focus. And then, I imagine too, the world of business has also very much changed. Amy, you mentioned how your work at a news company, right? How you could see the writing on the wall and then needed to make a shift. So, just thinking about the professional world today, what skills or traits would be helpful for dads to instill in their daughters?
Networking.
Networking?
And I don't,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Verda.
no, go ahead, Linda, finish.
I was just going to say, teach them how things work, encourage a mechanical, analytical interest. I think it's too easy to give up on that kind of stuff, or girls aren't exposed to it unless a dad specifically goes out of their way. And I think that's so important in preserving their options. That's what creates an interest and a track in STEM, seeing how things work.
And I don't know if I would necessarily say a trait, but one thing I think when I think about my life growing up and what could have helped me, I think it's so important for dads to kind of give their daughters that inside view of how men think in every arena, whether it's business, relationships, and interpersonal thoughts of men. Because what I found in my life, not having that shared in a real way didn't help me as I navigated relationships. It didn't even really help me because when I was navigating the business world, I just assumed, fairness, justice, that people thought like that, but we think differently. And because you all are men, you can share in a real way, and you don't have to feel like it'll come back at you because this is your daughter. It's not like the woman in the boardroom. So you can be totally candid. If you will give your daughter that, no matter what she goes into, she already knows the mindset because you've taught her how, okay, this kind of guy thinks this way, this guy thinks that way. Give her those secrets that only you all know because you're a man. That would have been invaluable for me.
Great point, Judge.
I would say just the confidence and to believe in yourself and to continue learning. I think all of us here have talked about continuing to grow. We never stopped learning, and that's gonna keep you going. As Linda said, the interest and the want to know.
And I'll piggyback on what Christy said. Flexibility and lifelong learning, especially through the pandemic. I've seen people that are utterly frozen and miserable at home trying to work in a different way simply because they're not willing to just take the handle of this new technology. And my phone is completely different, my home screen is completely different on my computer, and the company has seemed to have forgotten that if this department and that department and the other department are all changing their software, the end user that's got to use all three of those systems is constantly having to adapt everything they do. And you as that end user, you as that employee, you've got to stay flexible and willing to try to keep up with at least try to keep up with the changes, because there's going to be another one tomorrow. And if you're not keeping up, you're just going to get snowed under. And so that flexibility and lifelong learning is just so important. Both my CPA credential and my CFP credential have tons of continuing education required. Why? Because you've got to keep up, you've got to keep current. And it's that way with all the systems that you use at work. You've got to be flexible because the management above you is changing constantly. And you've got to learn, like Verda said, how they think, how they work. So yeah, flexibility and lifelong learning.
So we have fathers letting your daughters know like how men think, right? In multiple capacities, at work, in relationships, in socializing. That can give your daughter a real advantage. Lifelong learning, right? Trying to understand how things work. So there's some insight from our wonderful panelists about what dads can do that would, in terms of instilling traits that would be helpful for their daughters in today's professional world.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions from our audience? Okay. Are there any questions from our panelists? Anything that we didn't talk about that, you'd like to?
Something that a couple of other people said earlier that I agree with is have high expectations for your daughters and their careers. Teach them to have high expectations from the men in their life, especially those in romantic roles. Don't pigeonhole your children, especially your daughters. I'm one of 3 girls. I have a sister a year older and a sister a year older and a sister a year younger. And my older sister is truly brilliant, and she was always told how smart she is. My younger sister is truly attractive. She was always told how pretty she was. And there I was sort of in the middle, wondering where I fit into that whole picture. So we've talked earlier about admiring your daughter's traits and expressing your admiration for your daughter's traits. Make sure they don't get just one message. Make sure they hear a lot of all of it.
Great. Thank you for that. That's wonderful advice. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Linda, please.
It looks like a question came up from the audience on chat.
Yeah, what I see is that there's like lots of thank yous and words of appreciation for the insight that you all have shared. And that they found, Verda, your story in particular, moving. And so that's the comments that I've seen that have come through, and we're so glad that that's been the reception of the panel. Yeah, so I think in closing, let's close with what you would like to say to your father today or your grandfather today. And I think it would be nice to maybe some words of appreciation or other sentiment. And also that can be free. I don't need to put parameters on that. So what you would like to say to your father today.
I'll start before I start crying when everybody else goes. And thank you for letting me do this, because I hadn't done this since my father passed. I'd like to thank my father for loving me to the extent that he could, with all that he suffered with silently by himself. And I'd like to say I appreciate him for making me the young woman that I used to be, or the older woman that I am today. And that I would not be who I am if it was not for him being in my life. And in his imperfections, he was the perfect dad for me. Thank you. I appreciate that, Emily.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Verda. Thank you so much for sharing. Great. Thank you. Okay. Let's see here. Christy, would you like to go next?
Sure, after I clear my eyes.
Yes.
Yeah, just a big thank you, and hope that I'm still making him proud by passing on what he taught me to my family.
Yeah, thank you. That's so important, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that, Christy. Okay, Linda, how about you?
God doesn't make mistakes, Dad. You are exactly the right dad for me.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, and Amy.
As Verda said, and I still think we've got parallel lives somewhere along there. My dad was the best dad for me. He was my buddy. He was almost my business partner, except that he died before he realized the dream of us going into business together. I miss him every day. And he just taught me so much about enjoying life while you're here on earth. And I just I know I'm successful because of his messages and the time that he invested in me and with me.
Very sweet. Thank you. Okay, ladies. Well, thank you so much. This has been, wonderful with very rich insights. And I really appreciate you all sharing your stories and in doing so openly.
Ryan said his daughters want to say goodbye to us.
Oh, we would love it. Yes, please.
Bye, girls.
I wanted to
Have a
thank
great
you
day.
personally. Y'all did a wonderful job. On behalf of everyone, we really appreciate it. I knew I didn't want to come on, but they were adamant to say thank you. Right?
See, you end up liking it after all.
Right.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Love your dad lots.